Welcome, everybody, to the aftermath of the madness that took place last week that decimated sleep schedules, including my own. Uh, I don't know. What about you, Brett? Did your sleep schedule get boomed at all?
No, I work a normal job, and so I just watched the games when they weren't playing.
You watched the VODs back the next day.
Yeah, I mean a lot of them weren't too terrible,
Yeah,
but
I
I, wa-
I
I watched my team play live.
I watched all 22 matches live,
Madman.
staying up till 1 a.m. in the morning. I think on was it Wednesday night or Thursday night? It was so for the viewers, I am a weirdo. I work a 4 a.m. job. I get up at like 4:15, and so because the matches went so late, it was like I think it was like Wednesday or Thursday where it was like there were three map fives, so matches went to like 1:30, 2 o'clock,
Yeah.
and so I just made the decision to just not sleep because I was just going to work. And I then went to work the next morning and felt like death and decided not to go about staying up all night again. But I, I, I felt like I did decently well on the, like 4 hours of sleep average.
You're a crazy young guy. I feel like, a few years ago I would have been fine doing something like that, but now I've hit the point in my life where it's like I value sleep more than anything. I say that, but last night I stayed up until 2 reading a
All
book.
right. Well, then
So,
you have no room to speak then. So let's get things started, and I guess we already jumped into a little bit. So just let's start with just general thoughts and feelings and reactions that we had for the tournament. I am of the opinion that this is probably the best tournament that the league has ever run, personally, in
yeah.
terms of enjoyment, in terms of like quality of play and like storylines and stuff like that. I don't think there's another tournament that came close in terms of an overall hype factor.
Well, I think one of the best things is the finals wasn't a 4-0. It's been a while.
Thank
Um
goodness.
but no, it's just I feel like the storylines were awesome. I feel like everything about it, like I think there were some tragic things about the way the tournament ended up, but I think the actual matches and the casters and all that stuff, it was just as
Mm-hmm.
good as it's ever been, and better than anything that I can remember. It's
Yeah.
so many five mappers, so few, 3 and O's. And the 3 and O's we had were still like interesting.
They were
Like,
entertaining or at least relevant in a sense that they weren't 3-0s that we expected. I mean, we had
yeah,
like almost a third of the matches, like 7 out of the 22 were map fives, and then like 90 out of 118 possible maps were played. So like it was all of the matches were really good. Even I mean, yeah, there were 3-0s. I mean, but it's like those 3-0s were like early on in the tournament, like the losers bracket didn't have anything. Every team in the losers bracket at least won a map.
which I think is cool. Every single team won at least one map. That's
Some teams only
definitely
one map,
worth
but
noting. Only
only
one
one
team
team,
only won one map,
only
and
one
that's
team.
Dallas. But we'll talk more
Yeah.
about them
But like
later.
but what was really cool was like leading up to the tournament and like the couple days before, there were lots of tweets like from Jake, from basically all over the Overwatch community that like saw the initial setup for the tournament in that room with the teams literally like 2 feet apart facing each other, and they're like, what is this setup? Everyone's like, this is terrible. But then coming in once the tournament actually started, they pushed the teams back a little bit, so they were probably more like 5-10 feet apart. And as far as I'm aware of, as soon as the tournament started, there was not a single complaint from players, coaches, any talent or anything about the setup being like unbearable or being weird, which
Yeah.
like had been a problem with Hawaii in the past. Like a lot of teams would complain about competitive advantage going to APAC because of like prep time and things like that. But like the only complaint leading up to the tournament was the game room setup, and once the tournament started, there didn't seem to be a problem. And from a viewer's perspective, it was really fun to see the NA teams in the same room together. There were
Yeah.
a lot of fines handed out. Let's just say that. Lots of birds being thrown across the room.
It was
It was
it
fun.
was a really fun tournament. It made me really excited for end of season stuff. But yeah, and I like the desk setup
The
too.
desks, yeah.
I was a little worried about Ovalie because obviously she's not an Overwatch person.
Mm-hmm.
But I had seen her do a lot of league stuff, and she has good energy. She's fun. She's
Well, and
funny.
like Custa and Reinforce gave her like a crash course of the league the week before, and it was just those three on the desk. Like you take away Zoe and Reinforce and Custa just go crazy.
Yeah. Well, the best thing I think one of my favorite parts of the weekend on the desk side of things was day one starts, they do their preds, everyone's predding Atlanta over London, except Ovalie and I think Danny was
I
the
think
other one.
Danny
But
may have
Ovalie was
predded
the only one
London.
out of the three that went London, and she was right. And that made me happy. And Ovalie knows where it's
Well,
at.
and then she was like talking why she had to pred fusion about how she was literally employed by like the upper
Yeah.
org. It was the energy she brought to the desk was really refreshing, and her Custa and Reinforce just made the desk so much fun. Like I really enjoyed the desk, and getting to have Achilles and Avril cast games that in hours that most people because most people don't get to hear Avril and Achilles cast, but them being
Yeah.
able to do the finals and stuff was really good. It was nice to hear them do more
Well,
matches.
and I think you and I were talking about it pretty early on in the tournament. Like, they're probably my favorite casting duo out right now, just because, like, I feel like they have the right balance of like fun and seriousness, and they're really knowledgeable on the game.
Yeah,
which
I
doesn't seem true about all of the
genuinely believe like
casters.
Avril and Achilles, between the two of them, have probably the deepest knowledge of professional Overwatch, because I mean Achilles was doing Apex and like
Mhm.
Overwatch Korean contenders, and Avril has been watching APAC religiously. He is the
Yeah.
APAC apologist. So like between the two of them, they are just so knowledgeable about the game and of the mechanics, and then yeah, they have the right balance of getting across information but also being entertaining. And it's like because you can't be just all analytical, because that's just boring, and we don't have any caster pairs that are like that. But
Yeah.
it's like if you're not analytical enough and you just try and rely on comedy, then you kind of lose some of the audience base. Because I mean, I know there's a lot of the community that isn't a big fan of like Leg Day and Kiwi. I don't have a problem with them. I think they're fun. But it's like if you're of the opinion that it's like, oh, but you shouldn't only be talking in memes, like
Yeah.
they
I'm
they
not a
sometimes
huge
do.
fan of the two of them
But it's like
casting.
it's like it just kind of have the right balance, and I feel like Achilles and Avril have the best balance of that. And then obviously Mr. X and Uber are they're
Yeah.
just they're Uber X. They're Uber X. You can't really beat them.
Yeah.
They're just as good as it gets in terms of just sheer hype factor. But it was really nice to see Achilles and Avril get to cast the grand finals of that match of the tournament. But overall, the tournament was awesome. However, I mean, but it's not all sunshine and rainbows though. So the esports chart, echarts.org or .com, I guess, released an article looking at the viewership for the Midseason Madness, and the peak viewership was only 70,000 viewers, and it was during the grand finals. I mean, they don't count Chinese viewership for, I mean, and it makes sense because Chinese viewership has a history of being suspect at best. But like only 70,000 viewers for the grand finals of what was probably the best tournament that the league has ever had. That's not great. I mean, yeah, the hours that the matches were played weren't great for NA, but I mean, I feel like they were more accessible to European and Asian viewers as well as a whole, versus like, because EU kind of always gets cucked a little bit. But like these matches, like the later ones went, were at like 8 a.m. I think, because I think Leg Day was talking about that on a vast stream when he was up. So it's like the hours probably didn't help, but it was just only 70,000 viewers peak is not great for the league. And I mean, this is a constant trend for the league as the viewership has been declining. But I definitely think it is a multitude of issues. It's not just. I mean, yeah, I mean they're playing on a game that is 6 years old, but I mean I guess they're playing Overwatch too. But it's just like, I mean, yeah, you could point at Blizzard to say they fumbled the bag a little bit in terms of how it's been advertised and how it's been handled. But at the same time, I mean, you and I were talking about it before we started recording. The esports in general has been declining in viewership.
Yeah. Well, I think part of it is if you compare um like esports, let's say esports 10 years ago when League was new, um if you look at like how quick League of Legends grew and kind of what kind of game it is, it's a video game that is two teams, strategically playing against each other, and it's structured in a lot of ways a lot like, other sports, real sports, and
Mhm.
it's kind of, the electronic child of it. But the thing is like if you look at modern day what people are watching, it's like esports at one point it was like it was trying to be taken more serious. It was trying to be more legitimate, and it was trying to get widespread viewership. But if you look at it, like the older generations just never picked it up, and a lot of the people that originally were big fans of like League of Legends and stuff, they're getting to the point in their lives where they just aren't playing video games like they used to and stuff. And so I think that plays a big role into it, where it's like if you look at all these like classic type esports where it's two teams playing a game, head to head,
Mhm.
it's like viewership in all of them is kind of dying. If you look at what esports are getting views, it's things like, you know like Fortnite's still getting a lot, and I feel like even then it's like I feel like esports as a whole aren't nearly as, like, I feel like just in general esports are kind of waning in the West at least.
Yeah, and it just Overwatch League has taken a brunt of that just because of its structure and its mishandling every now and then, and it just being an older game.
And we'll see when it comes out. Like,
That's the hope. The hope is that Overwatch 2 in October helps bring new life to the league because I mean we saw what happened when they had the drops enabled in week 1. I mean they had like over 100k viewers peak. I think it was, let me see here. It was 121,000 viewers for the first match of Kickoff Clash, which it's like if the Overwatch League is able to get over 100,000 viewers, that's pretty good for the Overwatch League, all things considered.
yeah,
But it's like that was because drops were enabled. And so the hope is that when Overwatch 2 comes out, it helps bring new players to the game and helps get some older players back. And then has the hope. What Blizzard needs to do is use the league as the poster child of the game and like promote it to heck in the launcher and in the menus and everything. Because currently, if Overwatch League is happening, the only way you know is it has the little live ticker next to the Overwatch League bit of the Overwatch menu. Like there's nothing it's not big bright on the main screen that says Overwatch League is airing now. Like there was nothing. There was nothing.
yeah, true.
So what Blizzard needs to do for Overwatch 2 is really lean into the Overwatch League and use it to promote the game and use the game to promote the league and just tie the two together, make it really obvious in launchers and in menus that it's happening. Because if you don't, the league's just going to be left out to dry.
Yeah,
And
which I think they might do because they might just deem it not financially, because I don't know that it's the most economically, um like the most enticing option for Blizzard. I think moving over to this free to play option, if they just focus more on getting the battle pass bot rather than views on any of their esports, I think that's what's going to bring in the money, and that's probably
yeah,
where they
but
put their
I
attention.
think because of it's too easy not to promote it.
Yeah,
Like it's way too
true.
easy to not just put something on the launcher and a little something a little more obvious in the menu of the game to not do that. Like that literally if they just do that, you'd get at least a little bit more visibility. So, it's whatever. But
Yeah.
enough doom and gloom. Let's actually talk. Let's actually
Yeah,
talk about
let's
the
talk about the
tournament.
games.
Let's talk about the game. So what we've done is we've separated the 12 teams that participated into like 4 categories in terms of their performance and when they went out. So we're gonna start with the teams that we've considered like the not quite, just not quite their teams. The teams coming into the tournament, they were like, they're not going to win the tournament, but they're good teams and they put up good performances. So we're talking like Toronto Defiant, Florida Mayhem, London Spitfire, Houston Outlaws. No, the only people that came into the tournament going, oh, they're going to win it all are the ones that were just off the goop on hopium. Like, neither you or I were like, oh, London and Houston, here it comes. We're going to, no.
Yeah. And we are big.
And we are
London Outlaws fans.
So, but all things considered, these 4 teams actually did quite well.
Yeah. Like, I mean, we mentioned before, like, every team had at least one map win, and all of these teams won at least one match outside of Toronto.
Yeah, it's like, be careful with that one. Yeah, Toronto
outside of Toronto.
The 3 of the 4 teams.
Toronto is probably in their own category a little bit in this, just because, like...
Yeah, they did go 0-2, but the reason why I think they're in here is because it's like, even though Toronto is the walking definition of a mediocre team, I mean, even though they got 3-0'd by the Dragons, it was actually a competitive 3-0. Like, I thought Toronto did better against Dragons than I thought they would.
Especially the first couple maps, especially the first map was really
Control
close.
Was really close.
Yeah, and they should have won it, and they didn't.
Yeah,
I'm sad about it.
Well,
but
and then they went to 5 against Houston, which, I mean, obviously the Houston goes to 5 against basically everybody and their mom. But then Houston just wins them at 5, and Toronto played it close. I can't, you can't fault Toronto for that. And I mean, Toronto took the middle 2 maps, and basically they did the Outlaws special of let's bring in Piggy, do some stuff, and then, oh wait, we're losing, let's bring Dante back. So, but I felt like all of these middle teams did quite well. London was able to pull out the win against Atlanta at the start, which we thought could happen, but Atlanta just kind of fell flat in that match. And London took advantage of it. And even their game against Shock was actually much closer than it really had any right to be. I thought that London was playing the mirror comps, like the mirror ball comps and the mirror Winston comps, fairly close.
Yeah, I think the big takeaway for London from this tournament, and really this whole, leading up to the tournament, the games, is they actually have like a pretty deep character pool. They can play a lot of different looks and look pretty good at them. The interesting thing was their choice of I totally spaced what I was saying. But yeah, I thought they looked pretty solid for the most part. I mean, the Florida game was really unfortunate.
Well, yeah, and it's like
a lot of that comes down to like Florida just flipped the switch.
Florida flipped the switch. They realized that someone on Winston, Xe kind of would go crazy, but someone on Winston that's definitely his best hero. And then they were playing more double flex than they did, because when they were playing against Outlaws, they were running RuPaul Onimo a lot. And then when they played against London, they decided to bring in Surma Jed back in. But then when they went up against Fusion, they went back to Onimo, and Onimo had, we'll just say, questionable ults sometimes. His beats were very strange. So they flipped the switch, but I mean, Spitfire can be happy. Bone back on the Zen.
Oh yeah.
Holy crap. That guy was taking names against Atlanta.
Which I'm pretty sure they're the only team that are running a DPS player on
support,
the Zen, right?
They're not the only team that's played DPS player on support, though.
Oh yeah. Who else?
The Spark would have occasionally run Architect on the Ana.
Oh yeah.
Which we didn't really see in this tournament because they didn't really play a whole load of Ana from my memory. They just mainly did like the Anas. They just did like Zen, Brig, like BAP stuff. So, but
yeah, I think it's working for London pretty
well. It works
pretty
for London
right, better than it should.
Well, and I think we talked about this when they were playing. It's like, because I keep wanting to say Boneback, which I guess is like the meme Zen, because Backbone is like his May, probably one of the best Mays in the league. Like Zen's primary fire translates pretty closely to Mays.
Yeah,
like
which
right click.
I've said this before, but I think, like, honestly, every player on London has like just shocked me this year. Like it's
they've shocked
beautiful.
Everybody.
Yeah, it's just beautiful to see, this group of players that before this season, like,
More
were
memes.
just very forgettable. And this season they've just shown that they belong in the league, and it's so cool to watch. It's you have like Backbone just going insane on the May and insane on the Zen. You have Sparker, who
Is
is just he's a top
he is a
level
top level hit scan.
hit scan, and his Sojourn is super solid when he pulls it out. And yeah, I just think London is fun to watch. London's great, and I think by the end of the year, I think they win games like this Florida match. I think they have the potential to be one of the top teams by the end of the year.
Yeah. And they just got unlucky. Mayhem flipped the switch, pulled off the reverse sweep. I mean, it was a really close match. Lost me a lot of money, channel points. But
That is why you don't gamble. I'm just kidding.
Gamble the channel points. The Avast companion stream channel points market was in shambles for me. I lost the house.
Random note, kind of unrelated, but so in League of Legends, there's this stream that is going 24/7 that is so fun. It's called, oh, what is it? It's something Timo. I'll have to look it up later.
Okay.
But no, it's brilliant because what it does is it pulls up live streams of just really low level play.
Uh-huh.
And you just gamble channel points.
No, the channel point gambling.
Yeah, and it's just like low level, like bronze and lower.
It's just
play.
They were fun matches. But then on the other side of things, anyway, the other two teams, Outlaws and Defiant, played each other. I mean, when Outlaws played Mayhem, it was not close. Outlaws usually, coming into that match, and I think I told you this, I was like, Outlaws don't 3-0 people. They just don't. They just go to map 5 with everyone. Yeah. And then they 3-0'd the Mayhem, and I was like, oh my goodness, they've learned how to 3-0 again. And then they went back to
I just think it's pretty impressive that out of the, 5 or 6 3-0s, 2 of them were the Outlaws.
Well, Outlaws getting 3-0'd by Glads, that's expected. Glads would have 3-0'd any one of these 4 teams. But Outlaws continue. I think they're now 7-1 on map 5s, which is funny because 3 of those 8 or 9 map 5s are against Toronto. But it's odd because Outlaws tournament run literally went the exact same way as Kickoff Clash. Did weird stuff, whatever, got 3-0'd by the Glads, went down, won a map 5 against Toronto, and then got beamed out in the second round. And the Outlaws did what they normally do. I mean, they win control, and then they kind of flub about in the middle 2 maps, win push, and then win control. I mean, it's whatever. The Outlaws, their game against Defiant went close. It just feels like Defiant have the Outlaws number. I think that's just what it kind of comes down to. So them going to 5 against Defiant, and Defiant played close against Shanghai, even though it was a 3-0. So the Outlaws going to 5 against Defiant, I'm not, it's whatever.
I don't think that reflects bad on the Outlaws
But then they went into the Atlanta match, and that match was winnable. Like, they took a map, but then the rest of the match, it was a lot of weird decisions. I mean, the one that comes up to me is on King's Row when Lastro goes on I don't even know what to call what he did. He went into the
it was weird.
He goes into the staircase health pack on King's Row B, and then watches as all of the Atlanta Rain come down the stairs, and instead of staying hidden, he just runs into the team, and instead of transing to get out, he just dies. And then the Outlaws just lose. And then it happened, and then it happened again on push, where he died in a fight where he shouldn't have. And he had trance and he died in the fight. And it's like, when it comes to those push overtime fights, you can't lose a player at any point, and he dies and the Outlaws just couldn't. Had he been there with trance, I think the Outlaws win that and they go to 5, and Outlaws probably win 5 because that's just how they are. And it's like that if had Outlaws won against Atlanta, this tournament would have been very different, as we'll talk about later. But I feel like there's 2 sides. Like Toronto can be okay with their tournament performance because, I mean, they're just the definition of a mid team. It's like them being in the tournament at all is good for them. I think they could probably improve, but I feel like Defiant and largely Mayhem sometimes just kind of are missing that it factor, like a player that can just pop off out of nowhere. But I feel like Hisu does that from time to time. But like with the Outlaws, Merritt was playing out of his mind in a couple of matches, and so was Pelican.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like the Outlaws, the problem with them, it's like part of me, you can like partly not be disappointed in their performance because it's like, good job. I mean, you lost to the third best NA team, but at the same time, it's like, you keep doing this. Come on. One of these days, it's like you can't keep being this gatekeeper top mid-tier team. You gotta be able to take matches off of Atlanta in playoffs. You gotta be able to compete and go to map 5 against Glads and Shock. Otherwise, the Outlaws are just permanently gonna be a team with a lot of blue on their Liquipedia page.
Yeah.
So, but those 4 teams, no one thought they were gonna win anything.
No.
So
and none of them. I mean, as we were saying, like all of them had good moments, and showed why they belonged in the tournament. And I think every team that was in this tournament,
put up a good showing.
Had at least outside of Dallas belonged to be.
Well,
But I would have rather had Dallas than any of the teams that didn't.
Oh, you're telling me you'd rather have Dallas than Justice? Oh, what are you?
Outside of Chengdu.
Yeah.
Chengdu. Imagine this: if Chengdu was in the tournament instead of Dallas.
Yeah, but that couldn't work because of the way that the
I know that,
but
but if it was,
why don't we talk about Dallas and the other 2 really disappointing teams, Dallas, Shanghai, and Seoul. Oh, I mean, I guess Shanghai is the least disappointing out of these, but come on, getting boomed 3-0 against the Shock. And then kind of getting turbo rolled by the what? I mean, what?
That being said, I feel like Shanghai and Seoul have the same excuse. No. I feel like the difference between Shanghai and Seoul is Seoul came into this tournament as favorites to at least get second in the tournament. Some people are picking them to win, and what do? Seoul Dynasty wins 2 maps. They didn't win a single match. Dallas Fuel is more disappointing because Dallas won only 1 map. No. So I was saying Seoul and Shanghai have the same.
Seoul and yeah. But
where with APAC being different, they haven't played strategy. I think Seoul losing to the Spark round 1
in the fashion they did.
That's like unforgivable. But the loss against Atlanta, it's understandable. Atlanta's running things. Like playing, I feel like APAC was just playing a different game than the West coming into this tournament. There weren't any like really good showings from APACs against APAC teams against Western
that's not entirely
teams.
True. I mean, yeah, Fusion beat Mayhem, but I mean, it's Mayhem. But I mean, Spark almost took down Glads. It went to 5, and that's probably in terms of looking at like top APAC teams versus top NA teams, that's the one match that you can look at and be like, okay, maybe. But that was also where Shy went crackhead crazy. I mean, Shy went insane in this tournament, but we'll talk about that later.
Thing about the APAC is they have, I think the way I see it is they have better players, like 1-for-1 than the West.
Even then, because the problem is APAC is more inconsistent with their top players. Because when I look at Seoul Dynasty, like when it comes to Seoul, Fuel, and Shanghai, they all had different problems. Looking at Dallas first, because Dallas, even though was the most disappointing, I feel like also had the greatest pass, because coming into the tournament, Dallas was already looking shaky. Like, honestly, Dallas had no right being the 4th seed in this tournament. No way. Like Shanghai deserved it way more, and even Outlaws would have been a better 4th seed than the Fuel.
Yeah, I think the London game was the one thing that gave me hope for Dallas coming into the tournament.
Yeah,
was their win over London.
The problem with Fuel is their DPS line is like, pathetic isn't the right word, but it just does not match up to where it needs to be if they want to be a top team. And they suffer from the same problem as Dragons do, where it's like Dragons and Fuel both thrive last year on being able to run like Void and Fate together and Fearless and Hanbin together. But now that they can only pick one or the other, they run into problems there. And Fuel, like Gurio, Edison, Sparkle, just isn't gonna cut it. It's not gonna cut it. Like their hero pool is weird, and like Sparkle's Tracer is not up to par with like Venom and Proper, Kevster, Fleta. It just
Yeah.
isn't. And then Gurio's hit scan has been suspect at best this season. Like, he has flashes, he has maps, but then he just disappears off the face of the planet, and
Mhm.
it just does. They just can't, and they just can't keep up. And them and Shanghai are both trying to rely on strats that worked in the past. Like, Fuel continuously is trying to play Lucio Moira. It doesn't work, okay? Like, sure, like, maps will be won, but you can't run Lucio Moira for, like, majority of a series and expect to win the thing. Like, Lucio
Yeah.
Moira and Sombra are the two things. It's like, stop. I want this out of my games, out of my eyeballs. I don't want to see it. So if you'll just run into, they're just not up to par anymore. And same with Shanghai. Shanghai, the rookies in the league are just better than them. I think Shanghai has kind of fallen behind. They kind of got maybe a little overconfident in their roster, because moving into 5v5, I think they're just, like, they can win against lower teams. Like, they're going to beat, they're going to beat the Hunters.
They have a lot of talent.
They're going to beat the Valiant, but, like, they're not going to be able to beat, they're not going to be able to beat Shock. They're not going to be able to beat Atlanta or any of the other top NA teams, because it's like, they're not. The one thing I will say, though, for Dragons is Lip was doing his darndest to win these matches. Lip was there. Lip was the one consistent. I mean, in the Fuel match, he went insane, especially on Circuit Royal. Like, Lip was doing his job, but the rest of the Shanghai Dragons were just not. They, like, Bebe was not really doing a whole lot. And, like, on Control, like, when they were running Izayaki, Lige Gone with, like, the Brig and stuff, they were doing okay, but then it just wasn't looking great. The rest of it, I just think Shanghai is slowly getting outclassed by the rest of the top teams in the league. And I think them booming out in this tournament is kind of like falling out in the way they did is kind of I would be worried about them moving forward and what moves on. So it's like Fuel and Dragon suffer from the same kind of thing, and them falling out is like, we kind of saw it coming during the tournament, like when Shanghai got rolled week 1 of Midseason Madness, and then Fuel just kind of struggling. So them exiting the way they did isn't really, I guess it's like hindsight, like, okay, well, maybe I guess we saw that coming. However, the Seoul Dynasty, my goodness, what happened? I like, in their match against Spark, Vin Diamond Creative were getting flattened by Bernard Alphaye. Like, that's not a dive duo that I would put at the top of the league, and yet Vin Diamond Creative were getting rolled.
Yeah, it seemed like they just weren't there, and I feel like, Hangzhou looked pretty solid.
Because it's like Dynasty went to 5. Like, Dynasty went to 5 against Rain, who, Dynasty, like, Prophet was doing Prophet things.
Although, I feel like the thing about Atlanta, they go to bottom side of bracket and they will get wins. Like,
yeah,
that's just Atlanta's not going to.
Like, Seoul shouldn't, like, if Seoul had been 3-0'd by Glads, I'd be like, oh, okay, well, I guess Glads are just better. But Seoul getting 3-0'd by their region mates in the Spark is what like worried me the most. Like,
that being said, we've always said that, any of the, top 4 or 5 teams in APAC can take games off of anyone else in any way. Like, it all comes down to who's popping off.
Yeah, and it's
Seoul just wasn't popping off that match.
Like, Prophet was doing his normal things, like, he wasn't put on a carry performance, but it's like, and Smurf was doing some okay things as well, but like, Stalker, Vin Diamond Creative just didn't show up to the tournament at all. Stalker was getting diffed left and right by Kai and Shy, and Prophet was doing his best, but it's like, you can only do so much when the other team is just that much better. So I think Dynasty's exit from the tournament is miles more disappointing than Fuel or Shanghai, because Dynasty came in as favorites to make it to the grand finals, and them going out the same place as Toronto Defiant.
Yeah,
like, when you're a contender, when you come into a tournament as a contender to win the thing, and you go out in the same round as the Toronto Defiant, it doesn't look too good. And Toronto Defiant put up a better fight against their region mates than Dynasty did.
That being said, I feel like I'm not worried going forward with Seoul. Like, I feel like next tournament, when it's just their region, I still think they're the favorite to win. I think, playoff come, I think they're still the most likely APAC team to make a boom there, like to make a splash there. I think, going forward, they're still the same soul that they were before this tournament. I think they just weren't here for the
Yeah,
tournament.
they just weren't here for the tournament. But I mean, speaking of, however, I mean, but as we've talked about, they were not. Seoul and Shanghai were not the best APAC teams coming in the tournament like we thought they would be. That instead goes to the three teams that surprised everybody. We're speaking Atlanta Reign, Hangzhou Spark, Philadelphia Fusion. Let's get the APAC teams out of the way. Spark and Fusion, wow, they kind of came out swinging, didn't they?
Yeah.
I mean, Fusion going down to Spark round one was like, you can consider it an upset, but I mean, it's APAC, so it's whatever. But I mean, Spark in their entire tournament run, they just went all in on Shy. Shy was taking names. Shy was, I mean, they almost beat the Gladiators, for crying out loud, in the semis in the upper bracket. Like,
yeah, and the only other team to take the Glads to 5 was the Shock.
I mean, it's like Spark ran over Fusion and Dynasty, and then beat Fusion, and then lost to Fusion in the lower bracket. But I mean, when you beat Seoul Dynasty 3-0, like, you're making a statement for yourself. And Shy just went insane. Like, genuinely, coming from this tournament, I'd say Shy probably is, I mean, best hit scan in the world, probably.
Well, and the great thing about this is their last tournament was so disappointing.
It really was.
And you compared last tournament against this tournament, where they, they beat the Fusion, they destroyed Seoul, and then they had a close run against the Glads, and then they eventually lost against Fusion.
But it was close.
It was map 5, and I think it just shows that, the last tournament wasn't indicative of future tournaments.
I think this tournament, we finally got to see Spark utilize the talent they have on their roster. That's always been a problem with the Spark in the past, is that when it comes to tournament play, they just fall flat on their face, and even just sometimes in the regular season, they just don't do what they need to do with their team. But like Alpha Yi and Bernard with the dive against Seoul specifically, like, whoa, my goodness. And then Shy was just taking names, and Super Rich and Irony were doing their jobs. I didn't feel like they were a liability at all. Like, they weren't like popping off like crazy, but they weren't like being pulled out for the wrong reasons. The Spark got their crap together in this tournament, and they made some splashes. Unfortunately, it came to an end against the Fusion in the rematch in the lower bracket, in which the problem with Spark is, I think as the tournament went on, they got themselves caught up in the let's just have Shy kill everything, which is okay, but it doesn't work forever. And once Shy isn't able to become literal god, it doesn't quite work anymore. And so I think Fusion kind of figured it out a little bit. And that said, Fusion weren't slouches either. I mean, yeah, they played close to Florida, but Florida were playing well. And I think a large part of Fusion's success was like Bellis Ria on the ball. It's kind of clean.
Yeah, looked really good.
Although, to be fair, there were times where I was watching the Fusion matches and it looked like he was just platforming around on the map just to roll around. There were times.
But hey, why not? That's how you play ball.
There were definitely times where I saw him rolling around and I'm like, what is he doing? He was just kind of rolling. They see him rolling. So Fusion, I mean, MN3 was doing good, and like Fusion and Spark were just the representatives of APAC this time around. But ultimately, Fusion, they take down Spark, looking good, but then they too they fell fate to the APAC killers.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody in this tournament came in going, you know what? I think Atlanta Reign is going to be 3 out of the 4 APAC teams, single-handedly knocking them out of the tournament.
It was kind of crazy and really kind of fun to watch.
It was really fun to watch because, I mean, once they lost, because when they lost to London, you're like, oh, they're done. Because, I mean, last time they got boomed by London, it didn't look pretty after that. But last tournament they did. I mean, they showed up and they took down Shock, right?
Yeah.
And it's like playoff Atlanta is just kind of built different. So I guess we kind of should have expected it. But like they took down Seoul, and you're like, oh, Seoul, what are you doing? And then they go up against Shanghai, and you're like, oh, surely they don't do it again. Oh, they do it again. And then they go up against Fusion, you're like, oh, well, surely they don't do it again. Fusion's cursed to always finish in second place. Surely that's stronger. Nope. Rain took care of business.
I feel like, to me, I think one of the biggest things is it just, this tournament, and we'll probably talk about this a little later, but it's like, I feel like one of the biggest things that I realized with this tournament is that there's a big disadvantage to APAC. And I think if they want to balance out the regions a little better, APAC needs, another team or two. They need some more variety in the way they play, because I think playing against Atlanta, like, none of the teams really looked like they could handle them. I think Seoul,
Came
obviously
the
it was a map 5, but Seoul popping off will always take maps,
Yeah.
But when it comes down to it, was like Atlanta just proved they were the better team every time they played an APAC team.
Yeah.
And Atlanta's not like, I mean, they aren't the best team in the West. They aren't
No.
the Glads, they aren't the Shock, and to see them just destroy these APAC teams, just I think it just showed that the regions are in different places right now.
Yeah,
and
it's not.
hopefully by playoffs it gets a little closer. But
hopefully, because Atlanta Reign, the third best NA team, then running over the top 4 NA team. Because the question now is, like, had Spark beaten Philly, would Spark have been able to play Reign close? And I think that is an interesting thing to think about, because Fusion played differently than Spark. Because Fusion as a team were just trying to play good around Bellasria's ball, whereas Spark were just all in on the Shy Ash. I mean the Shy Sojourn. And Shy, I definitely think probably would have diffed Kai a little bit, just because Shy was diffing literally everybody.
I think it would have been really fun to watch.
I think a Spark Atlanta game may have been a little closer and much more entertaining than the Fusion Reign game was, just because of the styles they play. Because Fusion's just playing ball. I mean, I guess Spark was as well, but MN3 wasn't playing to the level that Shy was. And that may have made it be a little bit closer, but no one thought Atlanta was going to come in and roll the APAC teams. Nobody. And it was just funny how the way that bracket went, that all of that Seoul and Shanghai were placed in Atlanta's way.
Yeah.
So,
and it was fun to watch.
It was very much enjoyable to
NA
watch.
best region.
Yeah. So,
Confirmed.
Atlanta takes them down, but then Atlanta, of course, runs into the Gladiators. And that, like every other time Atlanta has run into the Gladiators, was not particularly close.
Yeah. I think the Gladiators, they just, I mean, and we've talked about this every time we talk about the Gladiators, and I think we will every time this year. They're just the most well-rounded team. They're the most, they're able to adapt to any team comp they need in any situation, and they have the depth of chart. And then in addition to having the depth, because I feel like, there are other teams that can play team comps like that. Like, I feel like London, they can bring out any comp confidently and play at high level, but Gladiators just have crazy pop-off potential. All of their DPS players are just insane, and they're just unstoppable. I mean, they lost against the Shock in the semifinals, but then they came back and looked really solid, especially the first like couple maps, especially.
Yeah,
they
mean,
were really dominant.
Shock and Glads are the clear number 1 and 2 teams in the league, and I feel like the upper finals where they played, Shock Proper went crazy both matches. Proper is insane, and that legitimately the single best player in the league, probably. I don't think you can really argue anyone else. But it was interesting that the maps that were played on both were interesting because the first one, Shock it was close. It was a close one too, but particularly like the Circuit Royale match, like map, that was a roll. Like Proper went crazy on the Sojourn. And what was weird is that when we went to the grand finals, Shock opted not to pick Circuit Royale and instead went to Gibraltar, the map that Gladiators literally had just full held the Atlanta Reign on.
Yeah, and it's one of those maps that you like. If you were to just guess which team picked that map, you would think the Glads.
You would think the Glads did because I mean, Shock literally stomped the Glads the day before on Circuit Royal because Glads don't have the same lineup potentials that Shock does. Like Glads won't be able to run Widow Sojourn, and if they do, Kevster's Sojourn isn't Proper Sojourn. And Kilo versus, it's like, were they afraid of Ons? Like, why would you be afraid of Ons when you have Kilo? And you'd be like, it didn't make a whole lot of sense because I feel like if Shock pick Circuit Royale instead of, I mean, they also lost their Eichenwald pick, which they were running like Diva stuff. Which is the one thing that I loved about this matchup, especially in the upper finals, was we got like the Roadhog mirror on Oasis. But like
I thought it was interesting how much we saw Mikey instead of Kaluge.
Yeah, well, Kaluge played a lot in the upper finals, but then when they came into the grand finals, Mikey played a lot more.
Yeah, did Kaluge play any maps in the grand finals?
Kaluge played Eichenwald because he played Diva.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And it was just kind of how the maps went because it's like on control and push, you're going to play a lot more because Mikey's the ball Winston player. So it's like when you're playing dive, it's just so strange that they didn't pick Circuit Royale. I mean, I don't know what the thought process is, but it's like in my mind, if Shock picks Circuit Royale map 3, I would imagine they win that, right? Surely. So you go into push and it's 2-1. Glads would probably still pick New Queen Street, I would imagine. And even if they pick Colosseo, I think Shock probably would still be able to win push. So you're going into control 2-2. And Glads already, and then after that, the maps are going to be picked the same way because it's Glad's pick. So you're still going to go to, what was it, Ilios, right? Was map 5?
Yeah, I think it was Ilios.
So, like, you're still going to go to Ilios. Shock, that's still probably going to run the same way. Shock is going to win that. And now you're going into map 6, Dorado, Glad's pick. Shocker up 3-2.
Yeah.
And maybe Glad still win Dorado, but now you're going to map 7, which Shock get to pick, and it's hybrid. Which, granted, I don't know if Kings Row or Midtown really play into Shock's strengths like they do Glad. So it's like the Glad still probably win the finals, but it's a 7 mapper instead of a 6 mapper. No, map 5 was Lijiang, not Ilios. So it's like, it's odd, the map picks, but both teams are... Lijiang, though, by the way, when Sam pulled out the Torbjorn on Night Market, I was like, there's no way.
That was brilliant. That was beautiful. And it worked. It was good. It was a good look.
It was a good pick. Yeah. I don't think any of us had Nano Torbjorn on our bingo boards this week. But both teams were just played really well. And with Shock, it was a lot of Proper, just doing Proper things. And with Glads, the player I want to point, Glad, Funny Astro on the Lucio.
Oh, yeah.
Like, he helped single-handedly win, what was it, the Spark, the game against the Spark in map 5 on Ilios. He was fragging out on Lucio. Like, teams just didn't have an answer. But then Shock tried to do it a little bit, but like in the grand finals, Finn was playing Lucio sometimes, and I was like, what the heck am I seeing? My eyes. So
I'm pretty sure I've said it before. I think Funny Astro is very potentially like the best Lucio in the league.
Yeah, the only other Lucio I'd put up there would be Prime Lee J Gone when he's playing Lucio. But
I think that Funny Astro is a little more consistent.
Well, and Funny Astro basically only plays Lucio. He's just Lucio. If you're playing Lucio, if Funny Astro's in, it's just all Lucio. Whereas when Lee J Gone is in, he plays Brig. So Glads, as you said, are just a more well-rounded team. And I feel like the first time that the Shock and Glads faced, it was more so just Shock had just better map picks.
Yeah. And
the Glads were kind of feeling... Ons... To be quite frank, for a large majority of the tournament, Ons just kind of didn't exist. I feel like Ons was kind of ghosting the Glads a little bit for most of it, but then when they got to the grand finals, especially on map 6 in Dorado, Ons just kind of was like, okay, no, we're winning this, and just took names.
Yeah.
And it was And so I was glad that it wasn't a 4-0 though, because it was close. I was
That
like,
being
oh
said,
no.
that last map, the way it ended, was pretty tragic. Like,
As George Lucas says, it's like poetry. It rhymes.
I was playing a board game with some friends, and we had the TV in the background muted,
Uh-huh.
and then we were just unmuting, pretty much every map, and then that map, we ended up it was muted for most of the time, but then we were like, oh, it's getting towards the end, let's unmute it, right? We unmuted it, and then it ended. We were like, wait,
Yeah.
no.
There's a debate out there a little bit as to whether or not the Shock C9'd the cart there. Like, you can argue it both ways. Like, the argument for it is proper, most specifically, like, literally blinked over the payload, I'm pretty sure. And,
Yeah.
like, Mikey rolled out way too early. So it's like, you can argue that it was a C9 because they had people that could have touched, but the argument against it is, like, Mikey messed up in his positioning. First off, he rolled out way too early, and that put him at low health. So he wasn't in the health position to touch, and so Proper didn't get the call that he was in charge of cart duty.
That was the disappointment. The biggest issue with it was Mikey showing himself so early and giving that away, because like if he had even just stayed back until he had 10 seconds left or whatever, he could have at least touched, and then I don't know that it would have made a difference, but at least he would have gotten the touch, and at least it would have felt better than him just being cornered and killed before there's even a chance for him to touch.
Yeah,
that was what
it's just a little odd that I mean, it's ironic that that's how it ended. Like, I think that was probably the single most fitting way for the mid-season tournament to end, considering the sheer number of C9s that we've had this stage.
I swear they've shrunk the payload range. Like it feels like
every time you see it and every time it's brought up, teams talk about it, it's like, oh, there's like, usually it's like the off tank is like the primary point toucher, and you're like, was it really that big? Was it really that key to touching the point? Because we have had more C9s in the last month and a half than I think we've had in the first 4 seasons of the league combined.
Yeah.
Like, it's to a point where it's like, if a match doesn't have a C9, it's weird.
Yeah. Like, I'm pretty sure like almost every match had at least one that could have been considered a C9 in some way or another. Like, it wouldn't really make a big difference, like I don't think it would have changed the outcome of the match in most of them, but it's interesting to see how prevalent it is.
It's just very strange that happened. It's just, there were so many, and so I'm just baffled by. It's unfortunate that's how it ended, but I feel like that was the most poetic way for the tournament to end, was on arguably a C9 of all things. Yeah. But I'm just happy the grand finals wasn't a 4-0, because it was really looking like it was going to be. It was awfully close until...
But it wasn't.
Until Shock decided to win push and then started pulling it back. But I mean, if Shock had touched the point on the end there at Dorado, I don't know. I think they still would have lost the fight, though. I don't think they were in a good... I don't think... I mean, because Ons was taking names there at the end, and I feel like he would have picked off Viler, Finn.
Well, and I don't think Mikey would have lasted long no matter what.
No, he would have been shredded down, so I think they still would have probably lost, but it's just tragic.
But it would have been fun to watch.
It would have been fun for them to do that.
It wouldn't have left those questions of...
What if?
Like, what if? Or, like, yeah.
What if?
Yeah.
So, it was a fun tournament. Glad Shock roll over it. So, what final thoughts, big takeaways from this tournament? Walking away, going into the second half of the season, what do we get from this tournament?
London's gonna win the playoffs. I'm just kidding. The big thing is, I feel like I think the story of this tournament is, this season is really close. Just overall, like, the bottom half, like pretty much anything outside of the top like 4 Western teams, or even 3 Western teams.
No, 2. Are you kidding me?
No, what I was going to say is, outside of the top 3, I think APAC and the West are like neck and neck.
Oh yeah, okay, that's what you mean.
Yeah. So like the top end of APAC and the like middle tier in the West,
Or where they
really
say,
close. And I think everyone, all of these teams that made the tournament have, like, who knows, like any one of them could do a Cinderella run in the playoffs or something like that. Like I honestly think like this season has that kind of potential. And then you have the clear Glad's shock at the top. I think, right now as it stands,
there's
those two
nobody
teams
even
are way better.
there is nobody close to them. There is a chasm between
And I
Glads
think
and everyone else.
just the top teams in the West are just
Way
miles
better.
ahead of
Yeah,
APAC.
and I think that just it. And you had brought it up earlier that APAC is at a pretty big disadvantage with their, because whereas with NA it's like if you're, let's say you're the Glads, you're able to play teams like London who are playing Rush, you're able to play teams like Outlaws who are playing Doom comps, or you're playing Shock who play who have Proper, you're having to practice against Proper. But then even like lower teams, you're able to get consistent practice against all ranges of play, whereas with APAC, outside of like Charge and Valiant, everybody beats everybody. Like you literally week to week, you're like, Fusion just comes and beats Soul. Fusion then just loses to Valiant. But it's like in NA, you don't come out in a week where it's like Toronto Defiant upset the Gladiators. You're like, huh? No, that's not going to happen.
I think it just goes to show, like, there is no top of APAC. I think APAC is all just like
a mess,
mid-tier NA. And I thought, there was always a possibility that the APAC region was just all, top tier and all going to be competitive with some of these top teams in the West. But I think this tournament just showed that they aren't there.
Well,
they aren't
I think a large problem with it, though, I mean, and we talked about it with the Dragons, if the Dragons roster no longer stacks up to the Gladiators or Shock roster, and even to the Reign roster, at least when they're in peak form, they just didn't get new players. And the rookies that came in on the NA side of things are insane. Yeah. I mean, there is no player in APAC that matches Proper.
Yeah.
Like, there aren't really tank players in APAC that match Reiner. Not that Reiner's like the best tank in the league, but it's like, I would take Reiner over pretty much every tank in APAC except maybe Smurf except maybe Smurf.
Yeah, well, I think part of it even comes down to the fact that, like, if you look at how young some of these players started playing at a really high level, like, this is the first year that we've had the amount of rookies we've had, and the quality of rookies we've had. That these are players that have been playing since they were 12 years old. They've been playing Overwatch.
If they've just turned 18, they would have had the potential to be playing since 12. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think a lot of these rookies are kind of in that boat where they're either the ones that have just turned 18, so that's like Proper and stuff, because Proper, he's been playing at a really high level that entire time, and same with Patapon
as well.
The other one, and I think there are more coming up in the next little bit as well. And I think it's just the teams that grab these players. I think, these players, when they start young, they just are inherently going to be better than people that started later in life. And I think as the game gets older, it's going to be, these up and coming players are going to outperform some of the old guard. And I think in the next year or two, the league is going to look a lot younger in a lot of ways. And the teams that pick up these new players are going to be the teams that do well in the next few years. And if the league keeps going past that, then it's going to, I think, just some of these new players are going to last a little while. I think that Proper is here to stay, and I think he's cracked. He's insane.
I think you've hit it right on the head then from this tournament. It's like APAC had a lot of new blood outside of the Dragons. Like, Dynasty had Creative and Vindime, and they also had Stalker who played, and then Philadelphia has Fixa, they've got M3 and Zest and Bellaria, and then Spark have Alpha Yi, and they've got Super Rich and Irony. But it's just like I think the NA teams, had better pickups overall, and it's like the NA teams also had the benefit of NA talent as well. And I think that's another thing that I think the NA side of things in terms of contenders and upcoming players is catching up to Korean contenders, because it's like when you look at the tanks that came out of Korean contenders, you've got people like someone, Kellen, who else? Tanks, like the and then whereas you go over NA, you've got like Reiner, and you've also Reiner, Mikey, Kaluge, and you just have.
You look at what teams those guys are on, and it happens to be the teams that won every.
Yes, even though Proper is the second coming of Christ.
Yeah.
From Korean contenders, it's just like overall, I feel like the NA, the Western talent pool is catching up to the Korean talent pool, and because the Korean teams and the Chinese teams, they're not going to be signing NA players, so like the NA teams have free dibs on those guys, and that gives them a little bit of an advantage in a sense. And I mean, I'm not saying that all of the players that have come up from NA contenders have been good. I'm looking at you, Titans, but I just the top half of NA clears APAC entirely, and it's not particularly close. But then, like you said, I would say the top half of APAC competes with the middle tier of NA. It's like teams like the Outlaws, teams like London, teams like Fuel. Well, then again, Fuel got cleared by the Dragons. But like for instance, it's like if Outlaws had played Dynasty, where would that have gone? Had Dragons played Spitfire, where that would have been a really cool match. And the unfortunate part of how seeding worked and how the tournament went is the only cross play we got were really the APAC teams against the best NA teams. We didn't really get to see any APAC teams play up against middle of the pack NA teams outside of the Fusion Mayhem game. That is the sole game that we can look at, because Fusion played Fuel, but Fuel looked tragic. So it's like it's like the Fusion Mayhem game is like the one game that we can look at to be like, okay, how would APAC fare against middle of the pack NA teams? And according to that game, pretty close.
Yeah.
But that's it. It's one game.
And with that, are you feeling like scratching that rankings?
The rankings, some mid-season power rankings.
Yeah,
for the first time, we get full, actual, legitimate power rankings. So obviously, we're not touching anything under the Florida Mayhem. No touchy, because they didn't go anywhere.
I think we have a clear top two.
Oh, it's Glad's Shock tier break.
Oh, I was trying to say Glad Spitfire, but I guess Glad Shock works too.
My goodness, Glad Shock tier break clear.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Atlanta Rain.
Yeah, Atlanta Rain goes to the top of the next one. Okay, so now is when we get a little bit weird. So we do have Chengdu Hunter sitting in this middle zone. Would Chengdu have been able to beat any of these teams? Like, if Chengdu played Fuel?
I think probably, but it's hard to say.
Like, I feel like Chengdu, we kind of have to put them... I'm going to move Chengdu a little bit, and we'll throw them in a little bit. Okay, so let's start at the bottom. So I'd say the worst team in the tournament, in terms of that we don't want to, like, overreact, is Fuel. I mean, Fuel... Like, if Fuel played Mayhem, I think Mayhem actually probably would have beat them.
Well, I think, when this whole tournament cycle started, things were a little shaky for them, but, I was very cautious to push them down the rankings too far. Now... But it's been a whole half of the season that we've had so far.
But see, here's the issue though: is that Fuel boomed out, but I mean they got beat up by Dragons in Philadelphia, so it's like they didn't even get beat up by other NA teams. Is the problem?
That's true.
So I definitely even though Fuel just beat Spitfire right before the tournament, I think Spitfire better than Fuel. Like Spitfire looked better. But then the question is, if Fuel had played Defiant and Mayhem, would Fuel have won?
I think Defiant Mayhem still lose those.
But Mayhem beat Spitfire.
I think if Mayhem was playing like they did in the Spitfire game.
Well, then here's what we need to do. Here's the precedent that we need to set. Are we ranking based on moving forward in the year or based off of tournament performance only? Like moving forward using the Midseason Madness qualifiers and everything and the tournament performance, would Florida Mayhem beat Fuel?
I think moving forward, I think Mayhem beat the Fuel.
There we go. Problem solved. Now would
But I think,
Defiant beat Fuel?
and that's the harder one. I think Defiant still lose.
I think Defiant still lose as well.
So I think it goes Defiant, Fuel, Mayhem.
Well,
moving up.
So I think moving forward, I do think Spitfire will beat Mayhem moving forward. Even though Mayhem did beat them, I think Mayhem riffed at the right time. I think Spitfire's still better. Okay, so now we've got this mess of APAC teams. So I think how do we want to rate Dynasty? Because I don't know. Because they got 3-0'd by Spark, but then they took Atlanta to 5. So we've got
I think if we're saying moving forward, I would be tempted to even put Soul above the Rain.
I don't know about that one. Well, okay, well, yeah. If we're talking regular season performance, Rain is often known to just fall over. So if we are looking forward, I would say Dynasty probably could go over the Rain as well. But I don't know if I would put them up. Because the problem is, if you put them above the Rain, it's like, do you think Spark or Fusion are better than Dynasty? Because I mean, Spark just rolled over them.
I think Spark's just not as consistent as the Dynasty.
Same with Fusion.
It's hard to talk about Dynasty being consistent right now because this tournament they really weren't. But I think we have to leave them where they are though, just because they have.
Yeah. We just show that when Atlanta peaks, they're better than Dynasty, and Dynasty doesn't. They are inconsistent. I would say the Dragons are probably the worst of the APAC teams though here. Like I think their performance was, and when you take into account their midseason madness performance as well, I think Dragons look the weakest out of these 4.
Yeah, I could see that.
So okay, well, we do need to. Where do the Outlaws go?
See, and that's the question.
Had the Outlaws played Fusion, Dragons, and Dynasty instead of Atlanta, who would they have been able to beat? I don't think they would have been able to beat Dynasty because the problem is I don't think Pellet. It's just odd because Dynasty Prophet was kept slightly at bay by Venom, and then Fitz was definitely kept at bay by Kai, and Ultraviolet and OG were doing their. It's just like I don't know if Outlaws would have been able to beat Dynasty. I think Outlaws might have been able to beat Fusion depending on when they played in the tournament.
Yeah,
but I think they would have been diffed by Spark. But Merritt's played good as well.
I would say they go right between like the Spark and Fusion.
You think? Well, do we think Fusion are better than Spark? Or the other way around.
Fusion.
So we think that Outlaws go between Spark, Fusion, above Dragons. So if Outlaws and Dragons had played, I think it's weird because I've seen power rankings that have been on Reddit and stuff. Anybody, because I think it was Custa put the Outlaws above Dragons, and people ate him up. They were like, "There's no universe in which Outlaws beat Dragons."
I think Outlaws beat Dragons.
Yeah, and I think the game against the Fusion, I mean, Mayhem took Fusion to 5 for crying out loud.
Yeah.
So I think so then here's what then we need to look at Fusion, because I think Spark and Dynasty beat Spitfire, Mayhem, Fuel, Defiant. I think that those two, I think Seoul and Hangzhou beat those teams. Do we think that London, Florida, could beat Shanghai or Fusion? I think that is an iffy one. Because...
Yeah, and I think a lot of it will come down to map choice. Mm-hmm. Like, if London get...
Well, here's what I would think, though, because, I mean, Spitfire played Shock close in, like, the Ball matchups and the Winston matchups, which is, like, all that Dragons play. And it's, like, the problem comes in, though. It's, like, Sparker versus Lip. I take Lip because he was performing well, but it's, like...
But I feel like that's true with most matches that London go into.
That's true. That's true.
If you look at individual like DPS talent against DPS talent, it's like a lot of the teams they go against, it's like, yeah, I would choose the other team.
Yeah.
But so when it comes down to actual gameplay,
I think what we might have to do I don't know, because it depends on which Dragon shows up, because if Dragons play like they have, London actually probably could beat them, but even Mayhem probably could even beat them.
Yeah.
But I mean, Dragons ran the floor out of Fuel. So if we're thinking Mayhem and Spitfire barely beat Fuel, I don't think they can beat Dragons with how badly Dragons beat down on them.
Yeah, I would put Spitfire under Dragons just because I don't want the Shanghai fans to kill us.
Well, I mean, we're putting them under Outlaws. Okay, so currently we have Glads and Shock 1 and 2, tier break, Reign, Dynasty, Spark, Outlaws, then Fusion, then Dragons, Spitfire, Mayhem, Fuel. 2 tier breaks. I don't think that we need 2 tier breaks between the bottom tier. But then we have the Hunters at the top of the bottom. Now, most people don't touch their bottom tier because they just don't think they need to. But had Hunters been in this tournament, do you think they could have beaten Defiant and Fuel?
Yeah.
I think they could have as well.
And probably Mayhem. Depending on what round they... If it was first round Mayhem, Chengdu wins. If it was second round Mayhem in the lower bracket, Mayhem wins.
Well, because see, the problem is that Chengdu, they like the Gaga, Winston, and Ball. And I feel like Chengdu are... Like, they have Leave. And then the problem is they've got Jinmu doing funny things. And I think Leave definitely diffs Exy a little bit. Like, Leave is better than Exy. But it's like Jinmu versus Checkmate. That's interesting.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
So I'd say Chengdu and Mayhem are probably... Chengdu and Florida are probably about the same level.
Yeah.
And I would feel more confident about London versus Chengdu. I think London beats Chengdu, but I think Chengdu...
And I think I'd still put Florida ahead in the rankings, just out of the fact that Mayhem made the tournament.
So yeah, we're being a bit unique in this one, and we're actually putting Chengdu in the rankings. Most of the people don't even touch Chengdu because like, nah, there's no way. But honestly, I think Chengdu probably could have been able to beat the Fuel.
That being said, I don't think... How do playoffs work out? Like
playoffs, so the way the playoffs work is I think it's the top... because it's 10... I think it's 10 teams from NA. So I think it's the top 8 teams automatically qualify, and then 9 through 11, I want to say. Well, no. I think it may be top 6, and then 7 through 10 play for the final 2 spots. No, it's still, yeah. So it's top 6 from NA automatically qualify, and then 7 through 10 play for the last 2 spots, and then APAC top 2 qualify, and then 3 through 5, I think, play for the last 2 spots. Or maybe it's top 3 qualify, and 4 through... there's no way it's 4 through 6. Wait, maybe it is. 4 through 6, then play... So currently, if playoffs were to go now, then like teams like Defiant and Mayhem, they would be like Defiant, Mayhem, Uprising, Justice would be playing for those final spots, and then in APAC it would be like Philly, Chengdu, and Valiant would be playing for the last spot. I think it's a 3-team. I think that's how it is, but
3-team for 1 spot.
Could be wrong, but Chengdu is definitely the weakest of the not terrible APAC team, so they have an outside shot. But I mean, it would have been fun to see them in the tournament because of their dumb stuff that they play. But it is what it is. So I'm happy with this. Oh, we're not even talking about this bottom basement garbage fire of a tier. My goodness.
Who are those teams? I don't know.
Who are these bottom 7 teams? I don't ever want to see them play again. But I'm happy with this list, and this definitely could get us... We could definitely get some flack thrown at us for this one. I mean, one, putting Outlaws above Fusion, not only Dragons, but also Fusion, and then putting Chengdu even in the same category as the tournament teams. We have a lot of faith in the Chengdu Hunters, don't we?
I mean, it's... But... I mean, look at the teams we put them above. Like, are those really, like... Are those the teams that, like, if you look at, this was the best tournament we've had, it's because of the Fuel and Defiance performances. No.
True. True.
Not at all.
So true. So true.
We put Chengdu Hunters below all of the teams that played in the tournament.
Actually showed up and did things in the tournament? Yeah, that's very true. I mean, discounting Dynasty. I mean, really... The one weird bit outside of us putting Outlaws where they are is our Dynasty rankings, because it's like you look at that tournament and you're like, Dynasty 4th best team in the world. Did you see them play?
Being said, you look at like the way the Spark played in their last tournament versus how they look right now, it's like,
Well, I wouldn't say the Spark particularly did really well in the midseason qualifiers. It was really in the tournament. I'd say like the argument that you could make is putting Spark above Dynasty because it's like Spark looked better than Dynasty currently, but I just
saying is
trust
like,
Dynasty moving forward more than
yeah,
Spark.
and that's the thing is I feel like the Dynasty having one bad tournament doesn't mean that they're not a
Yeah,
good
and
team.
it's like the way that
because
they
the
went
Spark
out.
had
They
one bad
they
tournament, but
they
they're still a good team.
they lost to Shy, and then their backline kind of freaked out, and then they lost to the APAC Killers in a 5-map set. In fact, Dynasty played the closest against Rain than the other APAC teams that played Rain. So I think that's good enough. So I'm happy with these rankings, even though they are a bit spicy in some places. But we'll leave it at that. Now we had talked about beforehand that we couldn't agree on a play of the week, but I have on the fly actually figured one out. So the play of the week screen it's not set up properly. So I have no idea how this is going to show up. So we just get the full YouTube screen. So the one I picked was the end of the Rain Glads match, where on Coliseum they literally are trading like 1-for-1 in kills, and Kevster and Potapon walk the bot with like combined less than 100 HP between the two of them. It's like they literally trade 1-for-1, and Potapon is on 30 HP. Potapon's on 30 health, and Kevster I think is on like 20, and they literally just walk it in. And OG and Ultraviolet is literally like on the OG, Kai and Ultraviolet are literally like on the bridge top. Like they were sitting there, they're just waiting for it. That's what I have determined to be play of the week, because I mean there were a lot of good moments this week. Like Proper had like two aces on Circuit Royal. He did it against the Dragons, and then he did it against the Glads. But it's like they didn't win the tournament, and like I didn't feel like those were like critical moments. It was kind of weird. Whereas this one was like a game winner, and it's like I didn't want to pick the arguably C9 at the end of the grand finals, because it's like I feel like we've already done like 1 or 2 C9s as play of the week, and I didn't want to do another one because that one.
This tournament, I mean, this year's gonna have a lot more C9s.
Oh yeah, a lot more to come. So
at first it was like, oh, this is so funny. Like all these teams keep C9ing. Now it's just
it's an epidemic. It is actually an epidemic. It's contagious. Teams do not know how to stay on the payload. No team is free. Everybody has done it, I swear.
That being said, the interesting thing, so C9 is named after the organization Cloud9, right?
Correct.
Which nowadays is the London Spitfire. And they surprisingly don't have very many C9s, considering they are C9.
That is very true. But I mean, that's just the way London plays. London plays very disciplined when it comes to cart presence. Yeah, but I mean, hey, I think... who would have thought that the London Spitfire would have showed up in the grand finals?
Yeah.
Good old C9.
They're in every tournament.
They're in every tournament.
They're in every tournament.
Always present. C9 is always looking down upon us and frowning. that Cloud9 team in Apex will never live that down ever. I'm so like, imagine if that hadn't happened. What would we be calling it?
Probably after some other team.
Like, I don't know. Like, who knows what timeline we would be in if Cloud9 hadn't C9 3 times in a match in Apex back in like 2017. Who knows?
Yeah.
Or 2016. I don't even know what it was. Like,
which is tragic because it's so catchy to say C9.
It's just it is C9. An Overwatch term. You cannot say that in any other game. People are like, well, what are you doing? Like the organization? Like, yes, but no. Yes, but no. Anyways, that was the Midseason Madness wrapped up. We are now officially halfway through the season. There are no matches this week or next week, but that doesn't mean we're going anywhere. So next week we'll be going through Midseason awards, be giving out players we think deserve it. We will be not just having your typical MVP, Coach of the Year, that we're going to have some fun awards as well. We're going to have some fun with it. But then the following week, we'll do prep for Summer Showdown and all of those sorts of things. But in the meantime, don't get too bored because there's no Overwatch League. I know I won't be enjoying there being no matches, but I'll definitely be taking advantage of the fact that I don't have to schedule my life around matches happening for the next 2 weeks.
And if you get really bored, you can always watch the LCS. I'm just kidding.
Shameless
LCS
plug
is
of
dead.
another. Shameless plug
LCS
of another
is
league.
dead.
All right. Well,
Just kidding.
we will catch you all next week.
Yep.
Take care.